Welcome to Alaska EdVenture, hosted by Dr. Meinert, Superintendent of the Fairbanks North Starborough School District. This award-winning podcast is your gateway to the heart of Alaska's educational landscape. In each episode, we'll explore the unique perspectives of guests who are shaping education in the last frontier. Join us on Alaska EdVenture as we share the insights and inspirations found in Alaska's K-12 classrooms.
Welcome to another season of the Alaska EdVenture podcast. I'm Dr. Luke Meinert, Superintendent of the Fairbanks North Starborough School District, and super excited for the new school year to start and then to have these very special guests with me today, our two assistant superintendents, and I'll let you both introduce yourselves.
Okay. I am Kate LaPlaunt. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools, and this is my 23rd back to school season here in Fairbanks.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. My name is Sarah Gillam, and I'm the Secondary Assistant Superintendent. And in Fairbanks, this is my 12th back to school kickoff.
I love that. Yeah, Kate's definitely our historian on our team. I love that. She has a rich experience in Fairbanks and can provide us with a lot of historical experience, which is helpful. This is my 5th year in Fairbanks North Starborough School District. I think my 12th year living in Fairbanks because I worked for Yukon-Koyukuk prior to that, and then I spent 8 years down the Aleutian chain. So my 20th year in education all in Alaska. So
that's great.
Man, it goes quick.
Oh my gosh,
I can't believe we're here. And I can't believe we're here for another school year. Can you believe that? We've already kicked it off. I think it's been a great start. We've talked a lot about past successes from last year with our teachers and with our principals in the community, and then talking about some of the goals we have for the school year. And so wanted to start the podcast off talking about some of the successes we had last year. Last year we had 3 goals: literacy, improved attendance, and culture and climate. And so one of the things we worked hard on was literacy. I think we had a podcast last year on Alaska Reads and some of the literacy efforts that we had in both our elementary and secondary worlds. Happy to say that with our M-Class data, which is an early literacy screener, we saw 23% growth from that fall benchmark to the spring, which is amazing.
It really is fantastic. Yeah.
So first off, would like to thank all of our educators that put in the hard work to make that happen. And then Kate, maybe you could explain how that did happen. Like, how did we go about seeing that growth in our elementary schools?
Yeah, it was a lot of dedication from teachers and educators across this elementary schools who all agreed that elementary reading was so important, and especially in K-3. But as a district, as you know, we have taken this on as a challenge all the way through 12th grade. We want every student to be a successful reader, and we're not going to stop working with them until they are. But in the elementary schools, we do a screener called M-Class, and that just kind of gives us an idea of how a student is reading at the beginning of the year, and then we check back in at the middle of the year and the end of the year. And like you said, 23% growth. So the 23% more students were reading at grade level at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year, which is phenomenal growth. And we did that with a lot of different things in place. So one of them was a really strong commitment across the board to use the materials that we have as a district. We have excellent curricular materials that have been scientifically based and designed. And we said, these are the things we're going to use, and we're going to use them in every class across the district. And that way, even if a student moved from one school to another, they could just pick up right where they left off. Teachers could collaborate. There was a lot more able to talk and plan because they were using the same materials. And then we also used some really excellent intervention materials. I think people heard a lot about UFly last year, which is a phonics-based program that can be used in kindergarten, but it can be used first grade, second grade, third grade, or really for any student who is needing some more of that phonics base to launch them into reading. And that was a really strong program. And every school did a walk to intervention or a walk to read. So some places we had mixed grade levels kind of getting together, but kids were getting what they needed in doses that were appropriate for their age level and their attention span at every single school.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for that overview. And thanks again for the educators making that happen. We're looking forward to hopefully some sustained growth in literacy, both at the elementary and secondary level this year. And we'll talk a little bit about secondary literacy as we get into our goals for this school year. But Sarah, I would love you to talk a little bit about our attendance goal last year and some of the growth we made there.
Yeah. So attendance, across the country, it's especially this year, I feel like been a really big topic as far as chronic absenteeism or chronic attendance. And so we tried to really work with schools and parents to understand what that means. So regular attendance means that a student is attending school 90% of the time, which translates to missing 2 days a month. So 18 days over the course of the school year. That's where we really can see that there's, can be some opportunity lost if a student misses more than that. And so we really tried to empower our schools with data to know who are those students that are missing more. And oftentimes it's not, something, we think there's lots of different reasons why kids might be attended. Sometimes it's just, they don't have what they need, right? So we tried to make sure schools knew who was seeing problems with attendance and then what supports we could give them for that. So trying to make sure parents were informed, families were informed, and they had what they need in order to support them. So our goal was to see increased regular attendance, and we did. We went from across the district the year before 64% of students attending regularly. So that means that they came 90% or more of the time. And we increased last year to just over 66% of students attending regularly. And the reason that we say that I say that regular attendance sometimes can be hard is because you'll also see that we saw an overall increase in just our attendance rate, which is usually in the 90s, but we saw a 2% increase in our overall attendance rate too, which is awesome. Because like Kate talked about, those interventions and that, strong curriculum that we have, the instructional leaders we have in all of our classrooms do their best work when kids are there with them every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the percentage increase doesn't seem like a lot on the surface. 1 or 2%, you're like, oh, that's not that much. And so Sarah and her team dug into, well, what does that actually equate to in student hours with our teachers? Because we know when students are in school, they're much more likely to succeed than if they're not. And so that equated to over 100,000 additional hours with students last year because of that slight bump in attendance. And so just thank you to all the staff that are working hard to outreach to families and provide those supports to families to ensure that we have regular attendance, because it really does make a huge difference in students' lives in our schools.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk a little bit about culture and climate. So this one, I think schools took different approaches to this. We have action plans for all of our schools, and want to share some data with the community. Saw some really big improvements in our climate surveys, specifically among the community and staff members. So almost 6% growth for those two individual groups, which is tremendous. And then saw some slight growth with students. And so I think this year, we'll dig in a little bit more with students to ensure that they're feeling comfortable and psychologically and emotionally safe and physically safe in our schools. To hopefully improve those rates and improve the experience that students are having. But how did that show up in elementary or secondary worlds in terms of supports from schools that you noticed?
Well, I guess one of the things I would point out is that these goals that we had are overlapping. Yep. When you have a supportive, welcoming community at the school, the climate of the school, it feels like you want to be there. If kids feel like they want to be at school, they know that their teacher's looking forward to seeing them. They know that they have good relationships with their peers. They are more likely to want to come to school and overcome whatever obstacles they might need to overcome to be there. We actually noticed at our elementary schools that on days like the spirit weeks where kids got to dress up differently, or there was an assembly on Friday, or there was a field trip, that the attendance actually increased. And so again, if attendance increases, so does your academic skills. And when you feel good academically, like if I can read, I feel better about being at school. So they're all interrelated. And I think that just is an important thing to point out, that we are picking goals that, yes, they're separate and you can address them individually, but they have an overlapping impact on each other.
Couldn't have said that better myself. That was beautiful. And did want to point out that over 80% of our community ranks our schools at an A or B average. So sometimes we hear, the community isn't happy with our schools, but that's not actually what shows up in our climate survey. And so really proud of the work that we do partnering with our families and our communities. And overall, they are very happy with the education that we're providing our students. I want to get into a little bit of back to school planning. So what does that look like in prepping for a new school year? Maybe Sarah, you can start us off with what that looks like. We can also talk about Eielson. We had a big transition there with Eielson students moving over to North Pole, and all that goes into that transition.
Yeah, I think the crazy part about back to school planning is that it actually starts in like December and January of the year before.
Yeah.
So especially for secondary schools, but for elementary schools too, taking, it's that cycle of feedback. So as, things are happening this year, those ideas that they have or changes that they want to make, they really start working towards those in December and January and the whole spring semester. So looking at schedules in secondary, you're looking a lot at what schedules do we have to build. We're getting requests from students, making transition plans for those shifts from elementary to middle school to high school. North Pole schools, I just want to give a big shout out to them because they were so excited to welcome the IELTS students through their doors, and that started last spring and carried into this fall. I know I went to North Pole High on their first day back with freshmen and new students and was greeted by the entire football team cheering when I walked in the door, and it was just such a positive and welcoming experience. And so the schools really started those plans last spring to make sure that they were enacted this fall, and it was really smooth. And so, schools back to school, they're prepping schedules, they're getting rooms set, they're, in high schools, activities even start in July, so they're making sure all that's set up. We'll talk about it, of course, kind of probably for next year goals too, but this summer we were working really hard on launching a new school-to-home communication platform, Parent Square, and so we were doing a lot of prep on the back end to make sure information uploaded correctly, that we had good resources, getting our staff trained so we could troubleshoot and answer questions, and school supply lists, making sure that all that information that parents and families need is readily available for them.
Yeah. Well, great segue. I do want to jump into this year's goal. Sarah's super excited to talk about family engagement and Parent Square and how that fits into our family engagement goal and why we went with Parent Square.
Well, and I think we've kind of hit on it. Like Kate talked about the culture and climate, like how do we create a welcoming community when families, were being contacted about attendance, we do see that when families are engaged and they feel like they're welcome in the school, that ties into attendance too and how they can get involved. So last year we really started trying to find a way for two-way communication where a teacher and a parent can have an easy back and forth communication, especially through texting, because we know that's where all of us probably live our lives to some extent. So we started with an app called Remind, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. That, I used it when I helped coach different sporting groups, so you can send out easily information. And so through that, we found this company called Parent Square that had just bought Remind. So they were taking over, Remind, but still adding features to them. And so we learned about them. And I think I was sold the minute that I was working with them, and we'd looked at other things, but then they showed all the ways to have features, right? Because if you're a parent and you have kids in school, right, you've experienced the email with 4 links to a Sign Up Genius and a Google form and this piece, which teachers were using the tools that they had, right? They were trying to make sure that information was easily accessible, but sometimes it's a lot to absorb. Or if you heard from parents who have kids at multiple schools and you're digging through trying to find that email. And so Parent Square offered a product that has a lot of those really rich and powerful features all built into it. And so we worked with them, kind of vetted it through, found that it would actually be a cost savings for us because of all the other platforms or subscriptions that we had that we wouldn't need anymore. And so we worked with them to launch. And our hope is that it'll be a, kind of one-stop shop. If you have kids in the district, no matter how many schools they're at, and you need to find the information about that field trip or that volunteer sign up, you can go to Parent Square and find that information.
And I'm just going to put a plug in as a parent of a high school student. We can have the app on our phones, and that's exactly like I'm asking my son, well, what about this? And we're home and we can just look it up on our phone, or maybe we're, separate and I'm texting him and he can look it up on his phone. And so just having that same access to the same information on our phones is really helpful for everybody. And I mean, I used to have more than one kid in the school, and it would be very, very helpful for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really excited about that. We hope it's been a smooth transition for both our schools and our parents getting on there. We know as we continue to use the platform, it'll get smoother and smoother. So thanks for those that have jumped on early. And if you haven't yet, please jump on Parent Square. That will be the primary way that we're interacting with our parents in the community. Also want to talk a little bit about the other things with family engagement. So we're going to increase some of the communications home for our high school students that are credit deficient. We want to make sure that families have information necessary to recover those credits and have their report cards in their hands. So some of you might be seeing physical report cards come home this year. And then we're also big on positive messaging. So we know positive messaging from our schools is important, and families need to see the great work that their students are doing in our schools. And so we've challenged all of our teachers to provide increased positive messaging home for families. And so hopefully you're seeing that. And another thank you to teachers for stepping up and doing that for us. I want to talk about literacy. Now, Kate, you gave an amazing overview of literacy at the elementary level. Is there anything different this year with elementary literacy and what we might be doing?
You know, one of the things is, and I'm so glad that we're having literacy as a goal a second year, and you talked about it with the back to school with the teachers, is that this is such important work. We're not just shifting our focus away from it. So actually not a lot is changing, except that we are better at it and we know more about it this year. We are maybe a little less panicked about how it's going to go. We're just a little bit more prepared. Yeah. I think we're going to be able to communicate with families even better around it. And also we're starting to learn what was successful about it. Again, that continuity of the materials, everybody using the same thing, we're kind of addressing that in our math and saying, well, gosh, if it's working over here with literacy, would it work over here with our math? So we're already, kind of expanding in that way. And we're going to really be working on making sure that kids get the tutoring that they need in the school day and potentially after the school day. So I think we're going to have some new models for that as well.
Awesome. Love it. And then at the secondary level, we've got some things working on literacy as well this year.
Yeah, so building upon what elementary schools started, all of our middle schools will also have a walk to read program this year. So providing that targeted intervention in, maybe a shorter period of time, but really being able to be at the students' reading level. So they'll be having those implemented. And then all of our secondary schools, they had staff receive training last year in providing literacy interventions and specifically connections to reading class. So they'll be offering some more targeted, longer support for students who have that identified need.
At the end of the year, Mr. Beam and I from Teaching and Learning went and did a tour of all the schools, and we're kind of following up on how things were going. And one story that stands out to me was going into a classroom, and the students at the end of the year were looking at their reading improvement scores. And so when people think that this doesn't matter, it matters to the kids personally. Like they actually are so interested in their own growth. And kids were telling us, I went from this level to this level, and they knew what they had done and they knew what their growth looked like. And even if they weren't yet reading on grade level, they understood how much growth they had made. And so I think it's important for us to know those things, but I don't think that people in the general public realize how much kids care about their own learning and are invested in that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for them, it's not necessarily about the numbers. I mean, it's exciting to see the numbers on the page, but then what that translates to and their comfortability with the different subjects in the school, right? Especially as you get into the secondary level, reading is across all grade levels, whether you're in math, science, social studies, you have to be a good reader. And so those growth areas really help across grade levels. The last goal I want to talk about is growth for all. And so, this goal came out of a lot of conversations last year and looking at data. We spent a lot of time with principals and schools looking at school data, and a couple subgroups that stood out to us that weren't achieving at the same rates as other students were the Alaska Native students and our special education students. And so this goal comes out of that and looking at, digging into why some of our students and subgroups aren't achieving at the same rates as our other students. Our Alaska Native students make up about 23% of our students in Fairbanks. Special education is almost 21 to 22%. That's a growing population. And so we want to ensure that all students that step through our door can be successful and that we've got supports in place to ensure that they're successful. And so any initial conversations that you've had with principals and building their action plans this year that will get at that goal?
I think the biggest jumping off point that we've had is just actually talking about it and acknowledging it as something that we see across the district, and then thinking about how do we get to the root of the problem. I know another goal that we kind of have, or not kind of, but another goal that we have across the district is shifting in high school how we approach Algebra 1. So I think it's just been really helpful for principals to know that we're going to take that data take that big data, but then we're going to break it down and specifically look at these subgroups so that we know how can we better support those interventions. So I think the first piece of it is just acknowledging it, that we want to address it, and then having the data and the conversations around it to see how we can further address it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to give a shout out to the Fairbanks Native Association. They've been amazing partners in our historical work with Alaska Native students here in Fairbanks. And then our school board this year made a huge step in adding an advisory member from FNA on our actual school board. And so shout out to FNA's executive director, Melissa Charlie, who has filled in that role. We just recently had our first school board meeting, and it's such a pleasure to have her voice at the dais as we're talking about student improvement.
I would also say a shout out to them because they support our schools in so many different ways, but also we have tutors that are specifically, funded through their grants that they have too. And so along with our Alaska Native education tutors that we have, our migrant education tutors, they also support tutors in our schools, which is just the biggest gift I feel like our students can have.
And it benefits all of our students, not just our Alaska Native students, which is beautiful. And so want to wrap this up and talk a little bit about your favorite back to school experience that you've experienced so far.
So I was able to be out at Salcha. I visited a bunch of different schools on the first day of school, but Salcha really stood out to me. And one of the things that I appreciated there, it's a small little school, and everybody there is wearing more than one hat. And as the families and the kids were coming in, it was the lunch lady, who also I think is their secretary, just welcoming each family and each student by name, making sure that they were getting breakfast. Parents were stopping and getting pictures. And it just showed that it's everybody at the school that helps create that environment, that welcoming place that kids want to be. It's not one person. It's the school bus driver that welcomes them with a smile at the beginning of the day. It's the custodian. It's the nutrition service. It's the nurse. It's the teacher. It's the principal. It's everybody making that welcoming space. And I really saw that at Salcha.
Awesome.
Yeah, I started at North Pole High, and like I said, when the football team cheered for me to come in, I was like, everybody should get this every day at school.
That's hard to beat.
Amazing. It's hard to beat
That's awesome.
Having a whole cheering team for you. But I would echo just that, the excitement. I don't know that there's anything that can beat the excitement of the first day of school, and to have positions where we get to see that year after year is just so awesome. I mean, I went to a lot of different schools on that first day, and whether it was the beginning of the day or the dismissal point of the day, just the excitement and the passion and joy was just visible amongst all the staff and the students as well. So.
And parents too, as we go out to all of the schools on that first day, it's just so great to see how many parents, grandparents, caregivers, community members are out there welcoming our students. A huge shout out to the University of Alaska Fairbanks Athletics Department, who always helps support our back to school efforts. And they're out with many of their student athletes at our schools, welcoming our students back. And it's great to see the students interact with them, because the student athletes are like celebrities within our community. And I think just want to definitely the back to school excitement is something special. Like, I was talking to a teacher recently, and I say oftentimes I measure my year on the back to school part. A lot of people start with New Year's Day, but truly my start of the year is the first day of school, because it doesn't get better than that for me. And so it's been amazing as I've been out in schools, just seeing the passion of our teachers and our educators, and then seeing so many students who I've gotten to know through a variety of activities and being out in schools, and interacting with them and seeing the joy that our schools bring them. So, all right, well, I'm going to close this there. I just want to thank both of you for the amazing work that you do day in and day out. You're great partners in learning here in Fairbanks. And that concludes another episode of the Alaska EdVenture podcast with Dr. Luke Meinert. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for embarking on this Alaska EdVenture with us. Hit that subscribe button and we'll meet you on the next episode.